Thanks to a monster game by Ronny Mauricio and a clutch home run by Juan Soto, the New York Mets kept their winning streak alive on Sunday Night Baseball. They've won 7 in a row, and they swept the Giants.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I cover the New York Mets on this show. This is the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Well, the Mets had another great game on Sunday night. If there's one player to talk about from this game, it is Ronny Mauricio. What an unbelievable performance, as Mauricio has the first 4-hit game of his career, 4 for 4 with a couple of doubles and a home run into McCovey Cove. Just an absolute outburst by Mauricio. And it's very interestingly timed, as we are within a week of the trade deadline. The trade deadline is coming, let's see, what's it going to be on Thursday? So there is how many hours left? I mean, we're within 80 hours of the deadline? I don't even know exactly how many hours we are away, but it's getting closer and closer and closer. And Ronny Mauricio is a guy who will be in trade talks. I mean, some idiots out there were campaigning for Mauricio to get traded. And if you're not watching on YouTube to see the gag I'm doing, I'm pointing to myself, because I did a podcast before I went on my vacation where I talked about how Ronny Mauricio could be the piece that saves the farm for the New York Mets at this deadline. Because I still stand by the general premise that Mauricio has more trade value right now than Brett Baty, than Mark Vientos, than Luisangel Acuna, because there is so much to dream on with Ronny Mauricio. But I think the Mets should do the dreaming and hang on to him, and that's how I've sort of changed my tune this week, because the more I think about it, it just doesn't make sense to trade any of these young guys. We'll be talking about that more in the next segment, as Mark Vientos had his name swirling in trade rumors and all over the place on social media on Sunday. So we'll talk about that in the next segment. But for Mauricio, at a time where he absolutely could be moved, he put together an effort that has to make the Mets think twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times over about even considering trading him, because he looks like a star. I mean, this was a superstar type performance. And I've talked about Ronny Mauricio for years now, and he was always the prospect of this group that I did not like, because the numbers were nowhere near the production that the Mets were getting in the minor leagues from Alvarez and Baty and even Vientos. Those guys were having better seasons offensively, and I just didn't know if Mauricio was going to be able to cut on the chase, cut on the poor swing decisions. But he has improved dramatically in a short time here in the big leagues, and he's controlling the strike zone well. And so now all of a sudden you're looking at a guy who can still play shortstop, and I think other teams would probably plug him in as their starting shortstop tomorrow if they traded for him. But for the Mets, he could be your third baseman of the future. And maybe Brett Baty's your second baseman of the future. Not necessarily the spots we even envisioned for either of them, but the infield that the Mets went out there with this game, that might be where the Mets go, and it certainly could be the best lineup for the Mets moving forward with Jeff McNeil in center field. I mean, it really has been incredible to see the length of this lineup when these young guys are rolling. And in this game, it was Francisco Alvarez and Ronny Mauricio that started the first couple rallies that resulted in some runs. The third inning, Francisco Alvarez gets a leadoff single. Mauricio gets a base hit after him. You then have just some grab balls in the infield that result in a run. Brandon Nimmo hits a would-be double play ball, but he beats it out. So that was a good hustle by Nimmo to get out of that double play, which set up an opportunity with 1 out for Lindor to hit a chopper in the infield and for Alvarez to score. Also, just no chance to turn 2 on Lindor's ground out. So that's how the Mets get their first run. Matt Chapman ties the game in the 4th inning with a solo homer, and then he grabbed the lead. Actually, the Mets were able to grab the lead back in the top of the 5th inning as they had a pair of doubles by Francisco Alvarez and Ronny Mauricio. That was that other rally. But then you had Chapman go yard again and he put the Giants up. So a lot of back and forth in this game. And the Giants held that 3-2 lead until the 7th inning when Mauricio led off with that home run to McCovey Cove, an absolute blast. Anything that gets into McCovey Cove is a blast. And it was just down the right field line. At first, you thought it was going to hook, but you had Mauricio doing the Yastrzemski, waving it fair, and it stayed true. It stayed fair, went over and out of the ballpark. And Mauricio got the home run he was waiting for. We learned after the game that he really wanted to hit one out there. He had seen Barry Bonds with those home runs into McCovey Cove when he was a kid, and he wanted to do that. And he got his wish, and it was a monster home run late to tie the game. Couple batters later, Juan Soto goes oppo for his 25th home run of the season to give the Mets a 4-3 lead. And that's what this lineup can do, right? When you're getting so much production from the bottom of the lineup, all of a sudden you put those guys at the top to come through and end up getting the winning blast because they were set up from the bottom of the lineup, keeping them in the game the whole way through. That's what a deep lineup looks like. And before that home run by Soto, the first 4 hitters in the Mets lineup went 0 for 16. They were all struggling. Then Soto homers, and then you had Brandon Nimmo cash in another Mauricio double in the 9th inning for insurance run with a double of his own. So eventually Nimmo came through, but just the bottom of this lineup was incredible in this game. Mauricio 4 for 4 again, 2 doubles and a homer. Francisco Alvarez 2 for 4, scored a couple of runs. Jeff McNeil doubled twice, and the Mets just couldn't do anything with it. Starling Marte had his 6th straight multi-hit game. He continues to rake. And it was just a good offensive game for the Mets, and their bullpen did a good job backing up Kodai Senga. Senga, not at his best. The stuff still looked good at times. He pitched himself out of a couple of jams, but he walked 5, gave it 4 hits. Only runs came, though, on those 2 home runs by Matt Chapman. Otherwise, he was able to work his way out of some things. And then the bullpen combined for 4 scoreless. You had Jose Buda with a 1-2-3 6th. Gregory Soto made his Mets debut, a 1-2-3 7th inning. In the 8th inning, Reed Garrett gave up a leadoff single, then picked up a couple of strikeouts. Carlos Mendoza went to Brooks Raley. Raley had to face off against Wilmer Flores. Flores just hit a well-placed ground ball that the Mets just couldn't get to, and Flores got the rare infield hit. But then Raley got a line drive into center field, and Tyrone Taylor was able to make the catch, and that completed the 8th inning. The 9th inning was a little bit of an adventure for Edwin Diaz. He gets the first out, then he walks a pair of batters with a hit-by-pitch sandwiched in between, so he loads the bases with 1 out. But then he buckles down, strikes out Willie Adames, and then has to go up against the Giants MVP of the game, Matt Chapman, and he struck him out with a 99-mile-per-hour fastball up in the zone. Actually missed his spot, but when you throw a fastball with that much ride, good luck hitting it, and the Mets were able to pick up their 7th straight win, and Edwin Diaz got his 23rd save of the season. So a great game by the New York Mets, but what I want to talk about in the next segment is, one, how this game continues to change our perception of Ronny Mauricio, but also the fact that Mark Vientos' name was out there in trade rumors. Could the Mets deal Vientos and just move forward with Mauricio and Beatty in this infield instead? We're going to talk about that more here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money was easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. When I was using Monarch Money at first, I just noticed how many unwanted and useless subscriptions I had that I didn't even realize I was still paying for. I also started to see that takeout, it starts to add up if you're going to it week after week after week. I was able to take control of my finances. You can as well with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. We're within 100. We're so close. I would love to get there by the deadline, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. And also, when you subscribe, make sure you keep that notification bell on because I might be going live anytime the Mets make a trade this week. And also, we have Chris Schubert doing the Locked On Mets postcast after the final out of each game. So you want to check that out if you're looking for some post-game coverage on here with Locked On Mets. Let's talk about the latest trade rumors. And Mark Vientos was a big piece of discourse on Sunday because Bob Nightingale came out with a report for USA Today, and he talked about the Mets' pursuit of Luis Robert, and he said the White Sox would want Mark Vientos in any trade that involves Luis Robert. And I was pretty surprised how quickly it seemed like a large portion of the fan base, granted, it's always the loud minority that actually use Twitter still, but regardless, it felt like a lot of Mets fans were all on board for trading Mark Vientos for Luis Robert. And the argument that I was seeing a lot of is, Robert is a more complete player. Mark Vientos is a one-dimensional player. And Robert has 2.5 years of control, so why not give up 4.5 years of Mark Vientos? Personally, I think it would be absolutely insane to trade Mark Vientos for Luis Robert. Now, I'm not entirely opposed to the idea of trading Vientos, although I am a Vientos supporter, have been for a long time, and I would definitely not be thrilled, and I would be a little bit sad by Vientos' tenure with the Mets ending when, a year ago, he was this rising star that you thought was going to be a huge part of this team moving forward. But I digress on that a little bit. The bigger thing to me is it's just not the guy you trade in a Luis Robert trade. I wouldn't trade Ronny Mauricio in a Luis Robert trade either. As I've talked about the Mets potentially trading one of their young infielders, I have always held firm on the idea that it does not make sense to trade one of the young infielders for a rental unless that rental's name is Eugenio Suarez. And even then, I don't know if I'd be all the way in on it, especially because now the market for Suarez has gotten to a point that I don't think you could trade Vientos for Suarez straight up because they're going to get potentially 3 prospects for Eugenio Suarez. And while maybe none of those prospects has the floor of a guy in Vientos who, again, had put up some big numbers last year, but I think it's going to be tough to pull off that type of a trade. And it doesn't really seem like the Mets are in on Suarez. So when you look at this market, the more and more I am trying to see what's out there, the less and less I think it makes sense to trade any of these young infielders because I just don't think there's any pieces that are worth moving them for. Now, if you're able to pull off a trade to get David Bednar and Dennis Santana in the same deal, maybe I could come around on that idea. And I actually did a mock trade. I have this article that I'm doing over at Just Baseball. Every single day, we're adding new mock trades. We have really good prospect analysts that work for us at Just Baseball. So I'm able to put together trade packages, have them put together trade packages. Either way, I run them through Aram Layton and other guys who know prospects, and we can really gauge what we feel like is fair value for trades from an unbiased lens because we get so many different people's eyes on these trades. So today for Sunday, I published 2 mock trades for the Mets. And from running the names by, here was the package I came up with for David Bednar and Dennis Santana, which would mean picking up a guy in David Bednar who has, I think, 23 consecutive scoreless appearances from when I wrote this article. He's been absolutely unbelievable, but one of the most lights-out relievers in baseball. Would give the Mets a closer for next year if Edwin Diaz ends up walking with that opt-out in his contract. But for this year, a guy that slides into your 8th inning and gives you a real Robin to Edwin Diaz's Batman, as I've been talking on the show for a couple of weeks. So Bednar would be an outstanding addition. Dennis Santana has got like a 1.47 ERA on the season. He's been incredible. Actually, it's 1.42 ERA across his first 44 appearances, and a little bit of a reverse splits guy at time as well. He's good at getting left-handed batters out. So all of a sudden, if you were able to pull off that type of a trade, and you would have Edwin Diaz, David Bednar, Dennis Santana, Brooks Raley, and Gregory Soto as 5 leverage arms in your bullpen. That's not even counting Reed Garrett. That's not even counting Jose Butto, who continues to throw the ball well, or Ryan Stanek. Suddenly Stanek is the 8th guy in your bullpen and maybe a guy that's potentially on the cutting room floor at some point if you need an arm to come up for some reason. So it really would give the Mets incredible depth in their bullpen. And in that case, if you're getting 2, back-end relievers with a year and a half of control each, I could get my head around trading from your young infield group to get a deal done. The original package that we mocked, and again, this is something we've been working on for a bit, so it's kind of before I changed my tune a little bit on Mauricio, but the package was Ronny Mauricio, Nick Morabito, and a couple of arms, we had Jack Wenninger and RJ Gordon. That's a big package. I actually don't even know if you would necessarily take the second arm being included in there, or even an arm as good as Wenninger. I think that Ronny Mauricio and Nick Morabito would go a long way for the Pirates, because Mauricio would probably be their starting shortstop, Morabito a center fielder in Double-A. So, in that type of a deal that completes your bullpen, could I now see, after this great game by Mauricio, and obviously the defensive versatility that he brings compared to Mark Vientos, who is really looking more like a DH first base only type guy in the big leagues? We'll see. I mean, I don't even know how great he even would be at first. I think he'd have to spend an entire offseason on it to get himself up to speed. But I can come around to this idea that maybe Mauricio is the guy to keep, and you shop Vientos a little bit more. In that type of a trade, sure, I think I would be okay with it, because you're getting a reliever with multiple years of control and a top-end reliever that has a ton of value. Luis Robert doesn't have value, and that was my problem with the rumor. That's why I thought everyone was crazy to just be so willing to give on Vientos, who, again, we're within a year of him hitting 27 home runs in 111 games, then hitting 5 home runs in the playoffs, and setting a franchise record for the most RBIs in a playoff run, and the Mets didn't even go to the World Series. So when you think about it that way, I think that we are always too quick to give up on guys. Talk about 4 months ago, everyone was ready to get rid of Jeff McNeil. McNeil's had a great season. 2 months ago, everybody was ready to send Brett Beatty, packing. Now Beatty's looking great. So I think at times we are so quick to pull the trigger when a guy is struggling. And I just think that Mark Vientos has too much talent to give up on for a rental. Now, again, if it is a piece that really puts you over the top, sure. But Luis Robert, he's got a 636 OPS on this season. I like the idea of Robert. I've been campaigning for him on this show. But my idea of trading for Robert, which was also in the article, was trading Drew Gilbert. Now, you could say, well, Drew Gilbert can be the center fielder of the Mets moving forward. Isn't that more valuable than Mark Vientos? Potentially, but Drew Gilbert didn't have a stretch of 124 big league games, including the playoffs, where he hit 32 home runs. Like, we can't forget that happened not that long ago. Vientos is 25 years old. There is still a world where Vientos locks in, and in August, he hits 9 home runs, and he carries the Mets to a bunch of wins. That's still on the table. So I get frustrated when people are so quick to give up on a guy. And again, maybe I was too quick to give up on Mauricio, but the reason why I was talking about trading Mauricio 3 weeks ago was because I was looking at the Mets maybe being able to trade for Jarren Duran, a potential guy who was an all-star last year, who can bring actual star power to center field and hold down that position. I was looking at potential of trading for an ace for control. If you were able to get a Joe Ryan, or if you were able to trade for Emmanuel Clase or Joan Duran. But it doesn't seem like those trades necessarily are the ones the Mets are looking to make right now. And even with that, the more that you look at this lineup, it really feels like a team that should just stand pat. Like, I honestly don't think it makes sense to go out and maybe get anybody. Under the right circumstances, under the right construct, I still could understand trading for Robert because of the upside, because he matches left-handed pitching, because, quite frankly, if you were to just, as much as we all love Tyrone Taylor and what he brings to this team, if you were to just sub out Luis Robert for Tyrone Taylor, this team would be better. I do believe that to be the case. But I don't think I'm trading anything of consequence for Luis Robert. Again, I would trade Drew Gilbert, but Drew Gilbert probably has the highest probability outcome for Drew Gilbert is a 4th outfielder in the big leagues, which is not a bad thing. Or he's a starting center fielder on a second division team. Maybe that's the highest ceiling outcome. And for the White Sox, that could be what Drew Gilbert does. He could be their starting center fielder come September. Absolutely. And maybe he does end up being better than I expect. But I don't think you're running a PCA risk, because he's not that special of a defender in center. He's probably most likely about league average in center field and above average in the corners, which is still good, and he could have a role in the Mets. But when you have Carson Bench and AJ Ewing and Nick Morabito, you have some more depth in center field. And I think Bench is the future center fielder of this team. So in that sense, yes, I would give up 6 years of control for Luis Robert before I give up 4.5 years of Mark Vientos, when I still think Vientos can help this team this year. So that's really where I was with all the trade rumors swirling around Vientos. Again, if it's for a different player, I'm not going to crush the Mets for trading Mark Vientos, but I think if they were willing to entertain the idea of Vientos for Robert, that deal might already be done. And I think what the Mets are going to do when it comes to Luis Robert and Harrison Bader, I think two guys that probably have interest in acquiring to just boost their, their center field room, and maybe push Jeff McNeil back to the infield, is I think you are letting those two teams know, the Twins and the Red Sox, that you're very interested, but you're interested at your cost, and you're throwing a couple names out there of prospects you'd be willing to deal for those guys, and you're sitting back and you're waiting to see if at the 11th hour one of those teams comes back to the Mets and realizes, okay, well, we're not going to trade Luis Robert anywhere else, so let's get the $5 million off our books this year and the $2 million buyout on the $20 million club option for next season, and let's take Drew Gilbert, or let's take a couple of arms that the Mets might put out there. I think that's where they're at when it comes to center field. Now, when it comes to the pitching market, maybe the Mets end up getting in on a starting pitcher where it makes sense to trade a Mark Vientos or a closer. But again, for a rental that has not even played well this season, it just did not make sense to me. What I want to talk about in the final segment is the fact that one of the top arms when it comes to the starting pitchers is now off the board. So what does that mean for the Mets? And then we will get into a series preview, Mets versus Padres, coming up here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Day Hue, and so is this hat for Mets fans like me. This one hits the mark. Game Day Hue makes clean, no logo gear with team-inspired colorways for every pro and college fan base. It's all about letting your colors speak for you. No giant logos, just smart, versatile style that works on game day, on the course, or anywhere in between. And the hat just pairs perfectly with the rest of your Mets gear. So you have another option that's comfortable that you can wear. And again, I do love it on the golf course. It is cool. It's just a nice fit where it feels like it's made for athletic wear compared to some other Mets hats that just they hold the sweat. It just doesn't work for me. And also, it's not just hats. Check out their split shade gloves made for the golf course. The perfect gift for the fan who has everything. Right now, you can get 15% off with the code MLB15 at GameDayHue.com. That's GameDayHue, HUE.com. Code even stacks on bundle deals. So now's the time to load up. Let your colors talk, because colors speak louder than words. That's GameDayHue.com. Code MLB15. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. We get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You get a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description and go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, I believe the top starting pitcher on the market was just taken off on Sunday night as Seth Lugo has agreed to a contract extension with the Royals. Clearly, the Royals were tossing around the idea of trading Lugo because if they are out of it, and they're still trying to hang in the race, but if they're out of it, not trading Lugo would be malpractice. The guy is essentially was on an expiring deal at a player option for $15 million next season that there was no way he was picking up. But Lugo wanted to stay with the Royals. The Royals wanted to keep him, so they come to terms on a new deal that guarantees him 2 more years and $46 million, $3 million a signing bonus, $3 million a buyout on a $17 million club option in 2028. In between, he'll make $20 million in 2026, $20 million in 2027, and there's certain thresholds he can hit where that club option would just turn into a third guaranteed year, it appears, or a player option at $20 million. So it could end up being more like a 3-year, $63 million pack, $20 million a piece with each year, and $3 million on that signing bonus. Good deal for Lugo, who is certainly making up for lost time when it comes to the money he's earning on the back end of his career. And who knows if it ever would have benefited from the Mets, because I don't know if Lugo would have wanted to come back to the team that kept him away from starting for all those years. Probably not. And so he stays put, but that takes another top arm off this market. I don't know which starting pitchers even get moved at this point. I think there might be some surprising names, guys that are struggling on some teams. I mean, Eric Fetty was waived or DFA'd, and then he just ended up getting traded to the Braves, but it was pretty much just the Braves claiming him off waivers, essentially just a cash deal. And the Cardinals are eating most of the contract. So, which they would have anyway if he cleared waivers and he just got released. But I think you could see some names of guys who just haven't pitched very well, who might move around. Like, could Aaron Savali get moved again? I don't even know how he's pitching. He got traded to the White Sox, right? How's he even? Yeah, he got a 4.41 now, so maybe he's throwing better. So, yeah, a guy like Savali might go. I'm imagining his numbers to the Red Sox are better. Yeah, 4.10 ERA instead of 4.91 with Milwaukee. Maybe the Brewers, because they have so much pitching, they could deal a Jose Quintana if they wanted to. They could deal, like Nestor Cortez is in trade rumors now. So guys like that could move, but David Stearns has said if the Mets are going to trade for a starting pitcher, they have to raise the ceiling of this rotation. I don't know who that is on this market. I've already, made my claims against Mitch Keller. I don't think he raises the ceiling of this team, and I don't like the contract. I think it's like $55.7 million beyond this season for the next 3 years. I just don't think he's worth that kind of money. I think he's a back end of the rotation starter. I do not believe he's a frontline starter, so I'm not in on that one. You have the Diamondbacks arm, Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly. I think Merrill Kelly might end up being the guy that gets the biggest package because he's pitching the best, and he's a rental that should move. Gallen, you have the upside to hope on, but he's also a rental and he hasn't pitched well this season. Then you have the Marlins arms. And I do circle back to Sandy, although there was reports that the Mets are interested, but the asking price was too high. That's the one trade where I see Mark Vientos maybe getting dealt. Or theoretically Ronny Mauricio, but again, when he has a 4-for-4 game like that, I just don't know if the Mets can justify giving up on the upside. With Vientos, you can definitely make the case that he's a guy to trade because of his lack of a positional home, the fact that he's out of options, although Ronny Mauricio probably, I would say probably, but he could be out of options as well if he gets demoted one more time. If the Mets add a bat, they might have to demote him because they're not going to demote Brett Beatty. Regardless of that, you look at Vientos with, again, the lack of positional home, the lack of options. I can understand saying he is not a good long-term fit for this roster, especially if you plan on retaining Pete Alonso beyond this season. So capitalize on some value now and deal him to a team that really wants him. Yes, the White Sox really want him, but they don't have what you would want in return for Vientos. If the Mets decided that Sandy, who just had a great 7-inning start, that has all these contenders maybe now forgetting about the first 4 months of the season and saying, oh, well, look at that. He was really good in that one outing. But I've been on the Sandy bandwagon since spring training. I'm in on the idea of the Mets being able to fix him a little bit. The fact that he had to shake off a lot of rust coming off TJ, but a guy that's won a Cy Young that could absolutely, elevate your ceiling, if not this year, certainly in the next 2 years beyond this year. So in that type of a trade, sure. If they want Mark Vientos, okay, trade Mark Vientos and some other things and get Sandy and roll the dice on the upside. I'm in on that. Rentals, I'm not in on it. Just ultimately, the more you look at this team, the more you're watching them play, when you look at the lack of options on the starting pitching market, and since I mentioned Sandy, of course, we have to mention that Edward Cabrera is another guy that can absolutely move. Maybe Joe Ryan moves, but Cabrera and Ryan, with their years of cheap control, are just going to cost a ton to get. When you see the lack of option in the starting pitching market, when you look at how good this team has been swinging it lately and how this roster already feels pretty full as is, with Mauricio, Beatty, Alvarez all performing, Vientos hopefully about to turn a corner, it makes sense that all the Mets do here is just go out and get a relief arm. And I would just shoot for the best possible one, whether that is a David Bednar, whether that's Ryan Helsley, who could certainly be on the table from the Cardinals. That's what the Mets got to do with this trade deadline. And if that's all they do, fans should not be upset, because while this is a team that absolutely has World Series aspirations, I don't think the Mets are in the same position that the Phillies are in, where that is a core that has been, going at it year after year after year. This is what their fourth crack at it after going to the World Series. That was 2022 when they went to the World Series, if I'm not mistaken. 23. They got bounced by the Diamondbacks, 24. So it's the third crack at it after the World Series run. You have Kyle Schwarber, who's going to be a free agent. You have JT Realmuto, who's going to be a free agent. It feels like they are more on their last legs and needing to maybe reboot things and turn around their core around Harper and Trey Turner. So they might be the team that has to be more aggressive. While I think the Mets absolutely can win a World Series this year and they're currently in the driver's seat in the NL East, I think they're still at the beginning of their run. And they should not mortgage the future trading for guys that just aren't worth that level of return only because it's a seller's market that the prices have gotten to that point. Like, you should not be trading a player with 6 years of control that you really believe in for Zach Gallen. You just shouldn't. It doesn't make sense. Now, if you can get Zach Gallen for a couple of those starting pitchers, that are a little bit lower down on the pecking order, if you can trade those arms I talked about in the Pirates deal, Jack Weninger and RJ Gordon, for Zach Gallen, and you believe that you can fix Zach Gallen, he can be, the guy that has some top 5 Cy Young finishes on his resume, then I'm okay taking that shot. But to trade one of your young infielders, to trade one of your top prospects, I don't think it makes sense in this market. That's why I believe that on August 1st, all 5 of the Mets' top prospects are going to be there in Jet Williams, Carson Bench, and the 3 arms, McLean, Sproat, and Tong. And I think that Jacob Reimer and Ryan Clifford might be holding on to or might be held on to as well. So I really think that this is just not the market you necessarily want to be buying heavily on. But I digress on all the trade deadline stuff. It's tough to get away from it when we're in trade deadline week. Let's talk about the upcoming series. Mets have 3 games left to play before the deadline, and they're all coming against the San Diego Padres. The Padres started the year 7-0. They looked outstanding. They've basically been a 500 team ever since. They're 8 games over 500. So, yeah, 1 game over since that 7-0 start. They split a 4-game set over the weekend against the Cardinals. They're 4 games back of the Dodgers in the NL West. They're sitting in the 3rd wild card spot right now. They got a game lead on the Reds. You have the Giants, who are suddenly 3 games back, thanks to the Mets sweeping them. But the Padres are 3.5 games behind the Phillies, who are in the 2nd wild card spot right now, as you have those 2 teams in the NL Central, the Cubs and the Brewers, who are tied. But both of them have better records than the Phillies, so they'd be sitting in that 1st spot, whoever doesn't make it or doesn't win the division, And then you have the Mets, who are 5 games up on the Padres, and again, a game and a half up on the Phillies after the Phillies lost on Sunday against the Yankees. So when it comes to this Padres team, they just frankly have not been very good offensively this season. They're 29th in home runs hit. The only team who's hit less home runs than the Pirates, albeit it's been a pretty wide margin. The Pirates have 69 home runs on the season, which is super nice. The Padres have 89. When it comes to OPS, the Padres are 23rd in OPS. They're 25th in runs scored. It's been a bottom 10 offense all year. They've been a little bit better over the last couple of weeks, but it's still been middle of the pack, and they still haven't hit very many home runs. They just don't have a lot of power in this lineup. They got Machado. They got Tatis. That's pretty much it. Gavin Sheets has contributed 14 home runs. Everybody else is under 10. It's just not a very good lineup that has a lot of holes in it. Jackson Merrill's having a bit of a rough year. Jose Iglesias making the Mets seem wise to have not re-signed him. A 565 OPS. He's been pretty brutal offensively, still playing good defense, obviously. But this is a Padres team that you can absolutely pitch to. On the other side, though, they are very good at run prevention, particularly their bullpen, which is the best in baseball, a 3.04 ERA. Honestly, I think the Padres probably have to trade from that bullpen if they want to address other needs in their roster. They're at this weird point as a franchise where they can't really spend more on their team. They don't really have a deep farm system, so they have to trade from their MLB team to address other needs, like they did trading Juan Soto to get starting pitching a couple years ago, and then trading some of the prospects they got in the Soto trade to get more pitching. And just they continue to kind of move parts from here to there, and that's why overall this team is just kind of thin. They're pretty top heavy. When it comes to this series, they're going to roll out Dylan Cease, and that is all we know right now. That the last time through their rotation, it was Yu Darvish and Nick Pivetta that followed up Dylan Cease. So we'll see if that is the trio that the Mets see in this series. The Mets will roll out Frankie Montas, Sean Manaea, and Clay Holmes. And we'll see tonight, Montas going up against Cease. Cease is on the trade block, sort of. I think he was on the trade block for Jarren Duran. I don't think he's really on the trade block for other teams or other packages. I don't even know who the Mets could trade to get Dylan Cease. Doesn't really make sense. Theoretically, I guess one of the young infielders, and maybe they love Starling Marte, but I don't know if the Mets are in a position to trade from guys that are contributing on their roster for a rental arm like Dylan Cease. So it'll be good to watch Cease pitch, and I'm sure some Mets fans might be salivating over the idea, if he does pitch well, of trading for him later on this week. I would not count on that. So we'll see. Should be a fun series. Mets trying to extend a 7-game winning streak. Really well-timed 7-game winning streak. You got everyone feeling good about this team as the deadline approaches, it gives the Mets front office the ability to just do their jobs the right way and not make any panic trades to just sort of satiate the fan base. They're going to make the right moves for this team, and I'm excited to see what those moves are going to be. I'll be covering all of them throughout the week, so make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any time we go live with a breaking news show. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. I'll always get those audio shows up as soon as I can after I go live on YouTube. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, stay up to date with all the news, and be part of our texting service, and there is a free trial to start. So if you want to do that during the trade deadline week, good time to subscribe. You can find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game at the show that take around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts and league-wide experts that are taking you through all the games. You find Locked On MLB Game on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.